Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 10 most disturbing true Alaskan encounter horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I've worked nights on the slope for 15 winters, wrenching on pumps and heaters at Prudhoe Bay. People love to say it's the cold up here that'll kill you. Those of us who stay know it's the quiet that gets you first. No stars for months, no sunrise to divide your days. Just the thrum of machinery beneath an endless night and your breath freezing on your mustache, over and over. If you want to hear something you weren't meant to hear, work the graveyard in the oil fields. You'll hear the pipes sing. It was late January, deep polar night, and the temperature had dropped to 40 below, wind chill worse. Around 2 in the morning, I got a call about a pressure irregularity out on Pad 17, a pump station that always seemed to catch the wind. We'd had a rigger go missing briefly the week prior, just lost in the ice fog between modules, turned up half frozen and ranting. After that, nobody wanted to be on certain walks alone. We joked about it like we always do. But it meant people took the long way around, stuck to lit catwalks, and talked into their radios just to hear another human voice echo back. I threw on my parka and took the catwalks with a headlamp. The air had that metallic sting that burns your teeth, the kind that makes every inhale feel like you're breathing through a coin. About halfway down the pipe racks, where the steel lattice formed a tunnel around me, I heard it. You learn the normal voices of machines, the low drone of a pump, the tick of cooling metal, the hiss of a valve settling. This was something different. A tone, like a single note sung by a human throat, carried through the pipe. It rose and fell like someone trying to form words, moving through the steel as if the line itself had a chest and lungs. I stopped and clicked off my headlamp. The dark folded over me, thick as felt, except for the pale slice of my breath drifting away on the slow breeze. Without the light, the tone was clearer. It came again, traveling along the pipe, vibrating the catwalk under my boots. I felt it in my bones before I could point to it. It came from ahead and behind at once, the way sound threads through metal. The closer I moved toward the pump housing, the clearer it became, still not words but a cadence that felt like pleading, a human rhythm mashed flat into a single mournful note. My radio hissed alive with a burst of static. 17! Then a noise like wind through taut wire. I pressed the talk button, throat suddenly dry. "Say again?" I said, and for a heartbeat my voice didn't sound like mine. Only the hum answered, a whisper of signal swallowed by the cold. At the pump housing, I checked gauges. Pressure was spiking intermittently. Up, down, up, like something living inside was pushing against it, trying to match a beat. I cracked the maintenance door and the smell hit me. Hot oil, a thread of sweet glycol, and that same cold metallic note bending at the edges like it was being sung from inside the pump. My gloved fingers found the panel switches by habit. I killed the outer lights to reduce glare on the gauges so I could see the needles clean. Darkness pressed closer, my headlamp throwing a crisp white cone across the face of the gauge, the needle jittering. That was when I saw the frost. On the inside of the maintenance window, crystal patterns had formed unnatural shapes. Not the usual feathers or ferns you see after a cold snap. I saw loops and lines, circles nested inside circles, like a map or a set of counting marks scratched by a bored hand. I rubbed a gloved hand against the glass out of reflex. The frost sweated, and then, in the raw circle I'd made, a face formed. Not a face, an absence of one. A hood, a fur ruff, darkness where a face should be. It was inches away on the other side of the glass, and it was looking straight at me. I stumbled back and my boot caught the grate edge. The hum leapt to a keening, sharp enough to make my molars ache. The pump rattled in its housing, bolts singing in a high, angry vibrato. The gauge needle lurched to the red and held there, trembling like a trapped insect. Training cut through the fear like a hand on the back of my neck. I swiped my badge, hit the kill switch, then dropped to the manual bypass valve and cranked it open with both hands, shoulders biting under the parka. The pressure let go with a howl like a living thing being torn loose. Steam slammed out, billowing white into the night through a roof vent, a muscular rush that turned the air around me thick and wet for a heartbeat. The sudden heat slapped my face through the gaps in my balaclava, and then the cold clamped down again in the sub-zero, snapping moisture to frost as the sound died back. Everything went still except the ringing in my skull and the tiny tick-tick-tick of metal shrinking as it cooled. When the steam cleared, the frost on the glass was gone. The hood in the dark had vanished with it, as if whatever shape had been etched there needed that skin of ice to hold together. The pipes settled with a gradual tink-tink like a sleeping animal shifting position. My radio crackled one last time, a whisper that sounded exactly like my name, dragged through teeth, threaded with that same machine note. Then silence, vast and total, a silence that pressed on my eardrums. The catwalk felt a mile long on the way back. I fought the urge to run and lose my footing on a patch of rime. The smart thing is slow, deliberate steps. The brave thing is to keep your eyes up. I did neither. The ice fog had thickened. Visibility was like looking through milk, every edge smeared. In the cocoon of my headlamp, the world reduced to 3 feet of graded walkway and my boots moving one in front of the other, the rails slick with horror. Somewhere behind the pipe rack something clanked softly, like a wrench dropped on steel from far away. I told myself it was thermal contraction. I told myself a lot of things because that's what keeps you between the rails. At one point, a shape loomed out of the fog. A figure in a parka, fur ruff a halo of white crystals, the silhouette so familiar it crawled over my skin. I froze, breath burning my throat from the sudden stop. "You okay?" I called, and my voice came out small and thin, the fog eating the edges of it. The figure turned. The parka nodded once. It didn't speak. It didn't move with the clumsy exaggeration of a man navigating ice. It turned sideways and slipped between the pipes, not through any gap big enough for a person, just folded into the lattice like fog poured into a mold and was gone. No footprints on the catwalk. No scuff on the rime. I stood there listening to my heart pound and the faint rumble of the plant through the steel. The urge to chase after nothing tried to take my legs. I made myself count 10 breaths. White clouds in, white clouds out, then started walking again, every step a decision. The wind shifted, and the pipe beside me hummed a single, almost human note, before the breeze moved on and took the sound with it. I kept my head down and didn't answer. Back in the control room, I filed the irregular pressure event as equipment oscillation. No injury, manual bypass engaged, system stabilized. The report read clean. It always does. Fluorescence buzzed overhead. The coffee had gone metallic in the pot. I sat with the heater vent on my knees until the feeling crept back into my fingertips and pretended the ringing in my ears was just adrenaline bleeding off. Nothing to note about frost-making faces. Nothing to note about shapes in fog. You learn what to write and what to keep. A few hours later, the missing rigger from last week, Derek, wandered in from the wrong end of the pad, the door alarm chirping a late warning. His cheeks were raw with frostbite, eyebrows white with little crystals that didn't melt even under the lights, and his eyes looked like he'd been crying in the wind. He moved like a sleepwalker, one hand still up at chest level as if he'd been reaching for a rail. "You turned it off," he rasped, voice shredded, cracking on the consonants. I told him to sit. He lowered himself into the chair like a man who'd forgotten how. "The singing," he said. "It was taking me with it. But you turned it off." He couldn't explain how he'd gotten out there. He couldn't explain why he'd come in from the wrong side, or how long he'd been in the white, or the frost lines on his inner hood that looked like counting marks rubbed scratched into the nap. Loops and circles like the ones I'd seen on the glass. Every time he tried to tell it straight, the words slid off what happened like oil off steel. I didn't push. Some things don't hold still enough to be told. I've seen plenty of bad things at night on the slope. People hurt, people lost, fog so thick it erases the world, low visibility with high consequence. I've dragged hoses in cold that made my hands feel carved from wood. But I've only ever heard a pump beg once. The memory lives somewhere in the bone conduction part of my head, behind the ear, where certain sounds go when they're not meant to be forgotten. I stayed nights 2 more winters. Sometimes on my walkbacks through the pipe racks the breeze would hit just right and the steel would hum a single note. not quite tuned to any key I know. When it did, I quickened my pace and kept my eyes down, as if eye contact could make it personal. If you're ever up there and you hear the pipes start to sing, don't listen for words. Don't try to interpret. Don't answer if it knows your name, even if it says it in your own breath. And if you ever see Frost make a face, you didn't. There's nothing out there but wind and metal. That's the line you keep if you want to keep walking the catwalks when the world is muted and the night has no edges. I've been an ER nurse in Anchorage for 8 years, most of those on night shift. The night crew knows each other differently. You see colleagues on their worst days and at weirder hours in the fluorescent lull when the world outside feels hushed and the city is held in ice. I've done compressions until my arms shook, and I've called time on people with the aurora flickering outside the ambulance bay. I don't scare easy, but I won't ride our hospital's oldest elevator after midnight anymore. Not down. Our ER sits in a wing that connects to the old building via a long corridor, a colder stretch of tile than the rest, infamous for flickering lights and vents that breathe like they're tired. The elevator at the far end is an original. The panel has a button labeled M. Everyone jokes M stands for morgue. Officially, it's maintenance. Either way, we're not supposed to use that lift for patients or staff. It's slow, it clanks, and sometimes it comes on its own, like it's answering a question no one asked. That night, I was charting a quiet hour at 3:12 a.m. We'd had a loss earlier, an older man, cardiac arrest on arrival. His family was still in the quiet room, wrapped up in blankets and shock. Death in a hospital is oddly loud with paperwork and then suddenly unbearably quiet. In that stillness, the elevator down the hall pinged. No one was near it. The call board didn't light. It just pinged, the doors slid open, and a wash of cold rolled up the corridor. Not the clean, filtered cold of air conditioning. Old cold, cellar cold, threaded with a faint, out-of-place note of lilac. Lilac does not belong in a hospital at 3 in the morning. The doors stayed open. I glanced at the nurse's station. Iris looked up from her charting, frowned, and tilted her head like she was trying to place a sound only she could hear. "Weird," she said. The elevator chimed again, brighter, as if it were trying to be noticed. Then something flatlined in Bay 3. The monitor alarmed. We both jumped. We sprinted. Bay 3 was empty. No patient, just the monitor going dead flat. The waveform was a straight line, but the machine thought it felt a heart. The alarm tone synced for a few seconds perfectly with my own heartbeats. Then it stopped. Clean. Silent. When we looked up, the elevator was closed. We got through the next hour in that strange postcode rhythm, checking on the family, double-checking meds, restocking because busy hands steady your head. The hospital does its after-midnight breathing. Vents sigh, lights hum, the clock drags. An hour later, I took linens down to the basement. I know better than to ignore instincts. But the basement chute had jammed earlier, and at that hour only the service elevator ran. The corridor to the old building felt even longer, the tile leaching heat from my boots. I pressed the button. The elevator arrived with that same breath of cool air and the whiff of lilac like a grandmother's perfume in a place that smells of antiseptic and coffee. I stepped inside and balanced the linen cart with my knee. I hit B with my knuckle. The elevator jerked like it had changed its mind. The M button lit on its own. A soft red I could feel more than see, like the glow had a temperature. I reached to press B again. The doors sliding toward each other, the faintest tremor shivering through the floor. For no good reason, I found myself whispering to the empty car, "No, no." The panel didn't care. M burned steadily, waiting. Part 2, the doors closed with a sigh that felt too pleased. The panel display flickered. 3, 2, blank. The elevator moved down, not the normal smooth drift, but a segmented slide, as if passing through floors that weren't there anymore. It stopped with a shudder that crawled through my teeth. The doors didn't open right away. There is a specific kind of silence in a hospital. The pause before a monitor alarm, the held breath before a code call. This was not that. This was the silence of a basement that had never warmed. When the doors parted, I saw a corridor I'd never walked. Concrete walls filmed with a sheen of moisture, condensation beating on exposed pipes. The temperature dropped so sharply I could see my breath. The fluorescent lights hummed warbly like old bees, their covers yellowed and cracked, light stuttering at the edges. The air smelled like damp paper, old tape, and something sweet that didn't belong, lilac, threaded with a metallic tang. The floor felt faintly sticky under my shoes. At the end of the corridor, a steel door stood slightly ajar with a red tag half torn. Morgue. My hands went colder than the air. Maintenance, I told myself, the way you say a word over and over until it stops meaning anything. I edged forward. Through the gap, stainless and tile reflected dull greenish light. Inside were shapes under crisp sheets. I didn't mean to look, but I did. One of the slabs was extended, sheet empty. The tag on the toe of someone unseen read the last name of the man who'd died earlier that night. Seeing it felt like walking into a conversation I had no business hearing. The lilac was stronger here, braided with the coppery hint of blood and the flat, clean smell of disinfectant. Overhead, a light flickered, strobing a jittery shadow across the far wall, like someone pacing in front of a window I couldn't see. "Hello," I said, because habits are hard to kill and we announce ourselves even to rooms. My voice sounded wrong. Too thick. The elevator behind me chimed softly like a sigh. I turned to go back. The car was dark now, but the panel inside glowed, the M button pulsing red, once per second. The rhythm matched a monitor beep that wasn't there. A shape filled the doorway across the room. A man in a hospital gown, hair damp in clumps the way it gets after hours on a gurney. But this wasn't the older man who'd died. This face I knew, from a photograph taped inside a locker door. From my second year, the coat I lost that gutted me. A teenager, sweet-faced, fractures and internal injuries, hit and run, no driver found. We'd worked him to the floor and I had never forgiven myself for how fast his light went out. He looked at me, not accusing, not grateful. Just aware, and he said without moving his mouth, "It still hurts." Something wrapped around my wrist. It was a pulse ox cord dangling from the wall, cold as freezer metal. It tightened, precise and clinical the way you secure a patient, not a nurse. Another cord brushed my cheek, sticky with residue, the faint tug of tape like fingers. The air pressure dropped. My ears rang and my head went light, an elevator feeling inside my skull. I yanked my wrist free, skin burning under the latex tug. The pulse ox clip left an ache like teeth. I backed into the elevator and jabbed at the panel. Every button I hit lit and then went dark, as if a hand over mine was canceling me out, over and over, as if the car itself was thinking it through. Then B glowed fiercely, decisively, like a teacher finally choosing for me. The doors closed. For a second, in the stainless steel beside my face, I saw the boy's reflection at my shoulder. He stood too close, head tilted, eyes dark the way grief is dark. The car moved like falling. My stomach rose and got stuck under my ribs. When it stopped, the doors opened on the normal basement hallway, soda machines humming, the hum of HVAC, a janitor's cart with pink gloves hooked over the handle, warm heater smell, the tang of cleanser. Not a trace of lilac. My wrist throbbed in time with my pulse. The M on the panel was not lit. The button looked harmless, old plastic worn shiny by years of hands that weren't mine. I walked back up the stairs, left the linens where they were, folded and wrong, because the idea of pressing that call button again made the back of my neck prickle. I washed my wrist in hot water until it stopped smarting. The faintest bruise ringed it, the shape of a sensor clip. I didn't say anything that night. What would I say? That the dead elevator took me to a place that wasn't on the schematics and handed me a memory I'd tried to keep polite? We're here to care for the living. The dead aren't ours once they pass. That's the line we walk every night. A week later, security flagged a camera glitch in the old corridor. "Looping shadow," the report read. Iris and I went down with maintenance during day hours, everything fluorescent and rational. The elevator didn't stop on M. It skipped it entirely. The maintenance guy insisted there wasn't even a proper stop labeled M wired to the panel anymore. He popped the service cover and showed us the wiring. Spidery, old, with capped-off pigtails taped back like someone had tucked away an unwanted thought. He smiled and said we shouldn't worry. Then he didn't look at the camera footage again. None of us did. I transferred to day shift 6 months later. Told people I needed better sleep, normal circadian rhythms, sunlight in winter. I still float, to nights when they're short, because the ER always needs hands and because the quiet draws you back even when you know better. When I do, I take the long way if I have to move supplies. And when an elevator arrives with a breath of cold and flowers that aren't there, I wait for the next one and pretend it's because I'm not in a hurry. Sometimes I catch a flash of movement in the reflective steel of a closed door and think of the boy, the one whose chart I could recite even now. In my head, I always say the same thing. I know it still hurts. But what you want from me isn't something I can give. This is what I tell new nurses now, when they ask me about the night shift and the stories it collects. If a door opens to somewhere you didn't call, you don't go. If you do go, don't look at the tags. Don't read the names, they'll follow you up the stairs. And if something tells you it still hurts, don't answer like you can fix it. Some pain belongs to another room entirely. Some doors look like elevators and some buttons look like letters of the alphabet when they're just memory. The M can stand for maintenance on paper. At 3 in the morning, it stands for a floor that shouldn't be there at all. I pulled night security at a cannery in Dutch Harbor one winter between seasons. When the plant is going, it's a thunder of conveyor belts, the stench of fish oil and salt, and a ballet of orange slickers moving like clockwork. In the off months, it's a hollow place full of cold machinery that feels like it's been dreaming about work. My job was simple. Do rounds, check doors, scan for leaks or transients, and listen to the wind rip across the Aleutians like a screaming wire. The only real danger, everyone said, was the freezers that'll drop you in seconds if you let them. We'd had a storm blow in, Black Sea stamped white at the tops, wind throwing sleet so hard it sounded like grit on tin. The plant was down to skeleton staff. I had the guard shack heater on full and my radio up. Around 1 a.m., the processing floor lit up for no reason. I saw it through the office window, fluorescent panels stuttering awake a section at a time, conveyor belts whispering forward a few inches, stopping, then inching again, like the place was breathing after a long pneumonia. My radio stayed quiet. No one called for power. No safety checklist. The only sound was the forklift alarm somewhere deep inside. 3 beeps, pause, 3 beeps. There shouldn't have been anyone on one. The night manager was asleep in his office, engine grid humming through the walls. I grabbed my keys, zipped my parka, and walked the processing hall, the concrete sweating cold up through my boots. Inside, the air carried flavors you only learn by living with them. Salt, ammonia, brine. The blast freezer doors were thick, vacuum-sealed slabs. Entering one is like stepping to the other side of glass. The world turns blue and muffled. Everything inside steals heat from you. The plant floor itself was all shadows and metal teeth at that hour. The kind of quiet that makes a person want to whistle, just to put something human into it. I didn't. Noise felt like it might wake something. Near the offal drain, wet streaks led from a pile of bundled nets toward the freezers, not blood. Wastewater stained dark, but in this light, it looked like someone had dragged themselves on their belly. The forklift beeper tilted up the pitch of its 3 notes and bounced off the steel ceiling. I followed the sound and found the lift parked but turned on, forks up, controls untouched, keys swinging slightly like someone had just hopped off and disappeared. The blast freezer, labeled BF2, had a free-swinging latch. The digital display insisted it was at -20. Through the small interior window, hoarfrost clouded the view, but I could still make out the safety lever on the inside, a bright yellow handle, right where it should be. Condensation patterns had formed on that tiny pane. I leaned close, breath fogged. For a second, the frost shapes reminded me of filleted fish laid in rows, each with an empty oval where the eye had been. I blinked and it was just ice again, a blank sheet of white. I radioed in. "Kim, you move any product tonight?" Static. Then my radio breathed my own voice back at me, delayed, same cadence, same little throat clear at the end. "Kim, you move any product tonight?" Perfect mimicry. Old buildings echo. Old radios lie, I told myself, though the truth of it ran a shiver up my spine. I clicked the latch. The seal popped with a soft kiss of pressure. The door swung inward an inch on its own, a ribbon of colder air slipping over my face, thinning the world to metal and frost. I palmed my flashlight tighter and stepped closer, the forklift's 3-beat warning pacing me like a heartbeat I couldn't call mine. Inside, the cold slammed me. My eyelashes clumped. The freezer felt bigger than it should have. Rows of metal racks disappearing into blue haze, edges softened by the float of dry frost in the air. The cold had a powdery taste like old snow, and the quiet had weight. I started counting steps so my brain had something to hold on to. 4, 8, 12. Brass numbers on the racks flashed dull in my light, then vanished into blue. Something clanged deep to my left, a sound like a hook hitting steel. I turned too quickly. The beam of my flashlight jittered and painted bars of light across aluminum pans and wire grids. The door behind me swung shut with a thud that vibrated through the soles of my boots. The interior lights dimmed a notch. You know the drill in a freezer. Don't panic. Find the safety lever. Move deliberately. I put my hand on the inside handle. Metal seized under my glove like blued steel biting flesh. The lever didn't move. A flicker moved down a row, like a figure in orange slickers sliding between racks, just ahead of my light. My breath thundered. The cold pressed against my ribs like a hand. Somewhere above, a tape loop crackled to life from the floor speakers in my head, the kind of safety announcement you stop hearing after 100 shifts. Keep hands clear, warped badly. The ends of the sentence slurring into a groan that sounded too alive. I took a step, and my foot skidded. The floor was a slick pane of packed rime. My breath blew out in a thick cloud and caught my own beam like fog. In one breath I saw a face in the vapor. White, eyes too dark, every exhale a new image. In the next, just vapor again. The fans above me ramped up, a low roar that vibrated the back of my teeth, building like someone turning a dial. Then the racks began to move. You read that right. The rows on either side of me slid toward each other, tiny hidden rollers screaming under the weight. It wasn't fast, but it was steady. A slow, relentless shuffle that closed the aisle I was in like jaws. The metal screamed softly, 1,000 paper cuts to the ears. Instinct took over. I jammed my flashlight handle into the narrowing space, a wedge and steel teeth. The racks chewed on it, plastic grinding, beam flaring, then dimming as the lens cracked. I grabbed the safety lever with both hands and yanked. It tore free, my gloves skidding on the icy bar, a lightning bolt of pain firing from my shoulder to my spine as something in me gave, or the lever did. The door popped an inch. The pressure difference slapped my face with a ghost of warmth from outside. That inch was all I needed. I shoved my shoulder into the crack and kicked twice, boot heel thudding the lower panel. The seal parted with a sound like lips unsticking. I fell into the humid brine stink of the processing floor, knees hitting concrete so hard my vision flared white at the edges. The door swung back behind me with an angry suction sound and latched itself, the stainless panel looking as innocent and dumb as a refrigerator in a kitchen. The forklift alarm stopped abruptly. The silence after was total, the kind that makes your own pulse sound too loud. Only the distant storm tried to rip the siding off the plant, a long, low moan like the building didn't care if it held together or not. I lay there long enough to feel heat begin to leak back into my fingers, an ache like thawing pins biting the pads of my fingertips, the busted flashlight still wedged out of sight on the other side of the door where a jaw of steel had tried to chew it in half. On playback, the freezer cameras showed nothing. No moving racks, no shadow between rows. The file was clean, boring, like most security footage, pixels that refused to agree something happened. The forklift logged no use. Nobody's badge pinged BF2. The inside handle, the safety lever, was found detached in my palm when I finally unclenched my fist, and everyone got a chuckle out of that later, how I'd hulked a frozen piece of hardware. The laughter didn't warm me the way it should have. I had frostnip on my knuckles afterward, little pale scars like I'd held onto dry ice too long. The night manager asked, light as a joke that didn't fit his face, if I'd seen Cody. Then he said he was kidding, poorly, and couldn't quite meet my eyes. He told me Cody had been a line worker, slipped between two racks and a moving belt years ago. Hurt bad, he said carefully, eyes skittering somewhere over my shoulder like he didn't want to put the memory down between us and make it real again. But that was a day shift, out of season, he added, as if that mattered. You look a little pale. Sit for a minute. I finished the winter. I left in spring, when the gulls returned and the cannery sang for real again, the place waking in the way it was meant to, with boots and voices and knives flashing on the line. Still, I dream that freezer sometimes. The blue hush, the bone-stiff cold, the way the machines will do the work they're told even if no one's telling them anymore. In the dreams, the racks begin to slide, and I wake with my hands curled into fists around air, my shoulders braced for a weight that isn't there. I keep thinking about how simple it all was, how easy the story is to write on paper. Equipment oscillation, false alarm, user error. The cameras show nothing. The logs say no one touched a thing. And yet my flashlight came out of that door chewed like a dog toy, and my skin carries a pattern of cold bites that look like a handle pressed too hard for too long. There's a comfort in explanations, in maintenance tickets, in procedures that end with a signed line and a date. But some nights don't want to be filed. Here's what I tell anyone who asks me what it's like to work nights in places built to be all efficiency and light. If you find yourself inside one of those steel blue rooms and you feel the racks moving when they shouldn't, don't breathe too big. Stay small. Keep your elbows in, like you're trying not to crowd out your own breath. Don't look the fog in the eyes when it makes a face for you. It's only your breath until it isn't. And if you hear someone clock in on your radio in your own voice, get out. Old buildings echo. Old radios lie. But sometimes they speak plain. When they do, don't argue with them in a room built to hold cold and keep it. I finish the shift. You always do. The blade runs, the road holds, and you keep moving because stopping feels like asking the mountain a question it might answer. The next time I came through Adigan in daylight, the slide path had already been shot and shoveled. Clean edges, blue-tinged snow laid like a patch, the kind of tidy repair that makes people think the road isn't a living thing. I slowed at mile 244 and looked at the shoulder where I'd seen him. The place looked ordinary. Scuffed snow, brush tips poking through, the curve of the ditch. Ordinary isn't the same as empty. A month later, killing time behind the shop heater, I told the old mechanic who'd run plows up here in the 70s. He spat a brown line into a coffee can, stared past me at some point on the wall where you hang memories to see if they move. There's always a man on that shoulder, he said finally. At least there was. The year they put the road in, one of the dynamite crew got caught. They never found him. Or maybe it's just something the past does so it doesn't have to work so hard. He thumbed the edge of his mug. I've seen him too. You can rationalize anything on the Hall Road. Aurora plays hell with radios. Snow and dark make faces out of nothing. Stress will put passengers in empty seats if you let it. But some things land in you the way a cold does. You can't think your way out, you just learn how to live around it. I buy a spare thermos every fall now. I fill it with coffee so strong a spoon could float and I leave it at the turnout at 244, weighted under a rock so the wind doesn't take it. Sometimes it's gone by spring. Sometimes it's frozen solid. I replace it either way. I don't stop in the teeth of the pass anymore, not unless steel and training say I have to. If something on the shoulder lifts a hand, I keep my light steady and my blade down and my distance respectful. If the empty seat beside me fogs the glass when I'm alone, I don't look at it. I don't talk to it. I keep plowing. People think bravery is charging into the worst of it. Up here, bravery is listening when the road says not yet. That night didn't leave scars you can point at. It left a sense. The weight of a command that arrived like weather. The knowledge that some warnings don't come with sirens or signs. They come in borrowed voices and frost faces and the precise geography of a finger pointing to the part of the mountain that's about to move. When the old mechanic told me he'd seen the man too, something in me unclenched. Not because it made sense, but because it meant the past was consistent in its mercy. So here's my caution. For anyone who works these miles when the world has narrowed to cone of light and blade and breath, you don't stop on Adigun when something tells you not to. Even if everything decent in you wants to roll down a window and offer a ride, the mountain doesn't care about decent. It cares about timing. And if the road whispers not yet, if the space beside you grows cold and a voice you can't place, sounds like it's using your own breath to speak, keep your hands easy on the wheel and your tires tight to the line. When the past tells you how to survive it, you listen. I run a plow truck on the Dalton. Locals call it the Hall Road. Nights are the gut check hours. You clear drifts between Prudhoe and Coldfoot, cross Adigun Pass with avalanche guns asleep above you, and you keep the road carved out of rock and ice so the big rigs can roll. I've done 20 winters. I've seen caribou appear out of nowhere, bears using the road tunnels like their own, and drivers who should have parked miles back. The only time I truly thought the road wanted to take me was the winter I saw the man at mile 244. Adigun is a switchback climb cut into the Brooks Range. It's steep and unforgiving, and the pass's mood is never mild. The night I'm talking about, the snow was fine as flour, the kind that finds every crack and drifts into hard slabs where the wind lays it. The aurora hung low like green curtains, breathing lazily over the ridgelines. I like to make a push around 2 a.m., a quiet window when the long-haul rigs thinned and I could lay a clean path. It's just me, the blades growl, and the sense that everything above you is watching and waiting. I came around a bend and saw him in my plow's lights. Tall, parka cinched, fur rough, rimed white. He stood on the narrow shoulder with his thumb out like the old days. No one hitchhikes up there. Not in that cold. Not at that hour. You don't end up on that shoulder unless a machine put you there or the mountain did. He didn't seem to notice the lights. He faced uprange, head tilted like he was listening to something only the past could say. I hit the radio. "Dispatch, you got any reports of a stranded vehicle near the pass?" The speaker popped, hissed, then the NOAA weather band bled through. Clean, calm, like an automated voice reading a forecast in July. "Winds light and variable," the woman said, while wind snarled around my cab and set the edge of my blade singing. I thumbed the squelch, tried again. More static. Then a whisper of sound like a cassette rewinding too fast. You don't leave someone to freeze. Not up there. I eased the truck over, hazard lights pulsing amber into the green glow of the aurora. The plow's idle set up a steady tremor in the steering column. The heater exhaled hot air that couldn't quite push the cold off my face. I popped the passenger door and leaned across so I wouldn't have to step out. "You okay?" I called, breath smoking out and curling back in. My voice felt small, like the pass had soaked up most of it before the words reached him. He turned to me. For a second I saw nothing in the hood but black like the face of an unlit cave. Then features coalesced out of frost. Pale, expressionless, a human face assembled out of cold. His mouth didn't move, but I heard, as clear as if he'd said it into my ear. "Don't stop here." I glanced down at the seat beside me. Stupid reflex, checking for a passenger that wasn't there. Only the stitched vinyl, empty. When I looked back up, the man was 3 feet from my open door. He hadn't walked it. He was simply nearer, in that way that makes your scalp crawl under your hat. My radio cracked again and fed me my own voice, shredded by wind. "Don't, here." The man lifted his hand. "Not a thumb now." He pointed past me, up and left, toward the slope above the cut. He didn't blink. He didn't stamp his feet or tuck his chin the way a living man does in that kind of cold. He just pointed, steady as a level. I followed his finger up the dark slope with my eyes. Hard slab lay over weak sugar snow. Wind had packed the top layer smooth as porcelain. You do this long enough and your brain starts reading snow the way a medic reads a pulse. My gut tightened. Something about the way that slab bulged near an alder thicket looked wrong, like a breath held too long. Under the engine's idle, a low rumble slid through the frame of the truck and into my hands on the wheel. Distant thunder, only there are no storms up there, just mountains clearing their throats. "Dispatch," I said, voice dropping into that forced calm you get when training takes the wheel from fear. We got an avalanche release hazard above Cut 3. I'm pulling through. Recommend holding traffic. My own voice echoed back on a half-second delay from the speaker. Holding traffic, like the radio was a canyon and I'd shouted into it. No reply, no acknowledgement. The no-way lady in my head said again, serene, "Winds light and variable." I slammed the door, felt the thunk travel up my arm, shifted into low. I dropped the blade and hugged the inside line of the road like it was the only safe thing left in the world. The plow threw a river of snow to the right, a hissing white wall catching the aurora's light. Every instinct screamed at me to get small, to make no sound, to pass through like I wasn't there. The man on the shoulder didn't move. My hazards smeared the aurora into orange ghosts as I rolled past him. The mountain exhaled. A white dragon unfurled down the slope behind me, fluid, silent for one impossible second and then roaring as it hit the roadbed. The noise is something you don't forget. Like a freight train pulling through your rib cage, like 1,000 whispers all at once agreeing to become a scream. The avalanche poured across the exact stretch of road where my rear tires had been 8 seconds earlier. The tail of my rig jolted as the back edge of it slapped the shaving wing and splashed away into the gorge. I drove the truck like a surgeon. No panic, no sudden moves, blade down, gears biting. In the passenger side glass, I caught a reflection that wasn't. A silhouette sat in the seat beside me, hood up, frost blooming around it like breath from a body that wasn't throwing heat. It wasn't a reflection. It was a presence that made the air on my right side feel heavy and old. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield in the shape of 2 people breathing, not one. "Not yet," he said. He didn't put a hand on me. He didn't grab the wheel. It was just those 2 words, simple as a posted sign, carrying a weight that made my muscles obey. Not cruelty, not kindness. Instruction. The road narrowed to the cone of my lights and the precise bite of my tires on scraped ice. I followed the inner edge where rock should hold, counting switchbacks like rosary beads. The aurora draped green lace over the ridge to my left. In my mirror, powder hung in the air where the slide had been, sparkling, beautiful, deadly. I don't know when the passenger seat was empty again. One breath I could feel the space crowded. The next, it was only me and the truck and the sound of studs chewing at ice. By the time I dropped out of the last hairpin and the grade eased, I realized I'd been clenching the wheels so hard my hands tingled. The heater had finally won the battle inside the cab, and still my back felt cold, right shoulder colder, as if someone seated there had been pulling heat I didn't have to spare. At the bottom of the pass, I nosed into a turnout and let the engine idle high. I put it in neutral and sat there with my hands braced on the wheel until the shaking worked its way out through my arms and into the column. Snow hissed across the hood like blown sand. In the mirror, the dust cloud from the slide settled slowly, glittering. The radio finally cleared its throat, dispatch hemming and hawing. "Repeat your last." A beat too late. I told them the pass needed a sweep at daylight. I didn't bother explaining the rest. If you've worked nights in the winter at Independence Mine, you know how the Chugach holds sound. The old mill buildings in Hatcher Pass look beautiful by day, glassy snow like sugar, sharp peaks cutting the blue, and by night they feel like your footsteps wake the ghosts of ore carts. I did winter caretaking there. Post-storm checks, heater maintenance, chasing off the occasional snow machiner who thought a closed gate was a suggestion. People like to say the mine is haunted. I didn't believe it. I respect heavy equipment, not fairy tales. Then the hoist engine started on its own. A storm had raked the pass all day, wind shouldering at the walls, plastering clapboard and corrugated skin with a white armor. After weather like that, the night drops into a calm so deep you can hear your own blood. I strapped on snowshoes and worked my way to the mill. The hoist room is a cathedral to industry. High beams, drums the size of living rooms, grease gummed in the corners like tar. A caretaker's job means listening more than looking. You learn the building's breath. I stood there and listened and heard metal, old metal, shift. Not snow creeping or ice settling. A gear, if you know the sound. A gear finding someone to engage with. My headlamp threw a clean cone through dust motes. The smell was old oil and cold iron. A bite of something metallic that made your tongue taste pennies. On the way in, I passed a chalkboard where they used to tally ore tonnage, head count, shift changes. Someone had wiped it clean with a sleeve. In neat, fresh lines, it read, 5 men out. The handwriting was too steady to be a tourist's joke and too recent to be a relic. I stood very still. The chalk line edges were crisp, no smudging, no dust settled into the strokes. I touched the number 5 with a gloved finger. Chalk smeared cold across the fabric as if it had been written seconds ago. A draft found the back of my neck. The hoist line, thick braided cable draping down the shaft like a tendon, quivered, just enough to make it sing in the edge of hearing. A little breath puffed dust from the rafters and brought up the faint sweet scent of old cutting oil. My LED headlamp shifted color for an instant, washing the room green like a shallow sea, then settled back to white. I did the sensible circuit, checked doors, peered at the breaker panel, ran my light across the hoist controller. The big steel cabinet and brass levers sat in neutral exactly where I'd left them. Nothing had moved. Nothing should move in a dead mill with the power isolated. That's when I saw the tracks. They weren't bare feet. They were bare soles. Old rubber boot prints, the kind with a simple herringbone stamp, small and neat. A row of them trod faintly across the dusty floor, leading toward the shaft throat, and then stopping. No return tracks, no scuffing at the turn. Just a polite final step into nothing. I backed toward the door, telling myself I'd write this up for the day crew. The hoist drum turned. Slow, lazy, as if a sleeping thing had yawned. The cable rose a fraction, lifted, then slack thumped. The lever had not moved. I'd swear to it. The motor wasn't humming. From far below came a sound that vibrated up through the bones of the building and into mine. A whistle like wind blowing across the mouth of an empty bottle. 5 short notes. On the board behind me, chalk squeaked, a tiny, painful sound in the cold. I turned toward it, heart tapping at my throat, knowing I hadn't brought chalk, knowing no one else should be there to write. The hoist drum turned again, a bare quarter of a rotation, then steadied. The cable sang a high wire note you feel more than hear. I looked back at the board. The numbers didn't change all at once, the way they would if a person erased and wrote again. They deformed as if a hand you couldn't see were writing badly, fast. Curves flattening, angles thickening. 4 men out. Chalk dust hung in the air, glowing in my headlamp like breath in winter. My chest cinched, the way it does under a too-tight harness. No power should mean no motion. I moved without thinking. Palmed the manual disconnect lever, the one you only ever touch on training days and in emergencies. It's a big throw, heavy with years, always a little reluctant. I set my shoulder and hauled. For a second it resisted like waking a bear. Then it gave with a slap that stung through my glove. The hoist drum spun once on momentum, cable twanged into a belly of slack, and then everything stopped so completely the silence rang. I stood in that sudden emptiness, eyes watering from the chill, and something rose up from the shaft that wasn't sound and wasn't smell. It was a sense of coolness that isn't air and isn't water, like standing too close to an open freezer and a doorway at once. My headlamp flickered, brightened, and went with a soft pop. The darkness went absolute, velvety, perfect, except for a faint, delicate blue way down the hole. Not strong. Like a carbide lamp, the kind you see in museum photos. The hair along my forearms lifted under wool. I smelled wet rock, sweat, and the particular sharp citrus of old-struck matches. Footfalls climbed old stairs where there were none, slow and careful, carrying weight. The blue light bobbed, halos catching on timbers that shouldn't still be there, on helmets that shouldn't still have heads under them. Shapes resolved because our brains will always make men out of light. 5 of them, shoulders bent, helmets low, the line moving as one. The light guttered and flared. One of the men turned his head up the shaft toward me, as if the skin between our worlds had thinned to gauze. I couldn't see his face. I knew he saw me. The pressure on my lungs tightened until each breath was an effort I had to choose. "All out," said a voice. Not in my ear, but in my bones, a resonance that lived just below the sternum. Then, softer, the scrape of a mouse on a wall. Not all. Every animal part of me took over. I lunged for the door, slammed into it shoulder first, rattling it on its hinges. found the handle with numb fingers and drowned the world in snow and starlight. The outside air hit like a slap and then gave me back my breath. The wind rose as if I'd released it, a sudden fierce gust that pushed me down the stairs and into the crunch of fresh powder. Behind me, something heavy thudded in the hoist room like a cart dropped short, and the chalkboard squealed all on its own. I didn't go back in. I stood in the blue dark, head thrown back, gulping air that smelled clean as pine needles and sharp as glass. The stars were bright enough to hurt. Hatcher Pass lay quiet like a held note. Inside, the mind kept its own tally. I waited until my hands stopped shaking enough to buckle my snowshoes again. Then I did what caretakers do. I finished the round, checked the doors, and told myself I'd write the whole thing up in the morning in neat lines that would make sense on paper. Morning softens everything, even in a place that holds hard truths. In daylight, the head count board had been wiped again. The words were gone, but the chalk left a ghost of the numbers I'd seen, a faint memory where the pressure of writing had impressed itself into slate. I told the site manager the hoist motor had tried to engage with the power cut. He shook his head and smiled the way old hands do when the new guy swears the boiler made a face. "We isolated that circuit before you were born," he said. "You don't pull that lever again unless you plan to be under it." I kept my mouth shut about the blue light and the footsteps and the voice that lived in my bones. I finished the season. Habit changed me in small, strange ways. On my evening walk-through, I started leaving a token on the hoist: a square of chocolate from my pack, a nickel, a twist of baling wire bent into a clumsy ring. Offerings, if you like. I never found them again. Maybe mice took the chocolate. Maybe someone's curious hand pocketed the coin. Maybe the past did. I didn't care to press it. On my last winter night, I set my gloved hand on the smooth, old wood of the hoist lever to say a private goodbye, to a room, to a job, to that thin strip of night that belongs to people like us. The wood warmed under my palm as if a hand on the other side pressed back, not pulling, not pushing. Just there, a pressure that acknowledged and was acknowledged. I don't tell ghost stories to scare the summer tourists. I don't have to. The mind tells its own. There are places where the work never stops, where bodies leave and something keeps tally because that's what it was built to do. Here's what I learned. What I pass on to the next caretaker who shrugs off the parka and says he doesn't believe in anything but weather and metal. When a chalkboard tells you someone's still inside, you don't grab a flashlight and go down. You shut the power. You count again in the morning. If a hoist line sings and a drum yawns awake without current, you pull the disconnect even if it fights you, and you don't brag about it over coffee. If a light, the color of an old flame, flickers deep in a shaft you know is blocked, you let it burn without you, and if you hear a whistle rise under your boots, 5 short notes, count your crew twice before you go. Don't pretend you didn't hear it. Don't pretend you did and it means nothing. Some warnings come dressed as superstition because that's the only way we've learned to carry them. The mind remembers its men. It keeps the numbers straight even when we don't. At night, when the wind falls away and the buildings hold their breath, you can feel it in your teeth. The old work's still ticking, waiting to be tallied true. I'm an electronics tech contracted to maintain FAA NWS gear on Middleton Island, a flat chunk of rock in the Gulf of Alaska that holds a radome like an egg and a weather station like a dare. Winter nights, there are an ocean of nothing. The wind will try to tear plates off your face. The sky throws green and purple curtains that rustle even though the air can be dead still at ground level. It's good work if you can stand the isolation. I liked it fine, until the scope showed me something that wasn't on any plan, and the radio answered me with my own voice. The island is unmanned most of the time. My gig was a winter rotation. Perform checks, kick heaters, clear ice from doors, babysit the primary radar and the backup generator when storms cut power. We had a night where the mainland went dark along a long stretch of coast, so our feed became even more important. At around 1:30 a.m., lonely hour, the radar track display bloomed a return at 50,000 feet, 20 miles due south. No transponder, no IDS-B, just a clean, fat echo like something big holding steady over black water. I ran through the health monitors. No faults, no alarms. The return stayed put. a needlehead of light hovering like a copter at altitude no copter belongs. No balloon should have been up in that wind. The aurora was bright enough to read by, which plays hell with sensitive electronics, but the rest of the scope was normal. I keyed the mic and pinged the Coast Guard to be safe. The line crackled like ice splitting. Middleton's old VHF whip sings when the aurora's mean. It did then. A tone slid down through the antenna that made the hair on my arms stand on end. And then a voice, my voice, came back through the speaker. "Middleton, radar, say again," it said. My breath hitched. I don't love hearing myself on voicemail. I loved this less. Who is this? I asked before training could choke me back. The speaker hissed, then said it right back to me on a delay. "Who is this?" The return drifted north on the scope. Lost 50 feet, regained exactly 50, like someone was testing an invisible elevator. I put on my gear, parka, headlamp, radio clipped, and headed for the radome. Inside that white dome is a living machine. It spins. It hums. It smells like ozone and hot dust and recent electricity. I climbed the service ladder, the structure answering with a slow, ship-like creak. Above me, the aurora snaked and unspooled across a sky so clear the stars looked near enough to swat. I keyed the maintenance handset inside the dome, a reflex just to hear a human voice at all. "Sight check," I said, and the words puffed white in the cold, stupid habit. My voice returned immediately in the handset, intimately close, like someone had leaned in behind me to whisper through my own throat. "Sight check." I stood perfectly still, one hand on the steel, counting heartbeats. The radar spun steady as a heartbeat, the sweep a soft, mechanical breath you can feel through the soles of your boots. Out in the shack, the scope continued to hold that single impossible return. The aurora brightened a notch, and the antenna above me sang a thin wire note I felt in my fillings. Part 2I killed the outer lights and let the radome go from white to invisible, the world outside turning to a low green murk dotted with hard, cold stars. I counted the rotation, 1/1000, 2/1000, and at 4 the scope should have updated. It did, but this time 3 returns popped and held, one to the south over water, one directly overhead, one to the north, staggered like geese. In the shack, the dots made a rough triangle around the island, each one steady as if they were parking in the sky. "Middleton, Coast Guard," the radio snapped suddenly, a voice I didn't know. "We show nothing. Confirm." I jogged back into the shack, eyes on the scope, heart pacing the sweep. One of the returns started dropping in altitude in a neat little stair-step. 50,000. 49.9. 49.8. Not a drift. A decision. Birds don't do that. Weather doesn't do that. Humans do that when they're bored in simulators or very sure of their instruments. The building shook. Not much, just enough to make the coffee ring kiss the edge of the console and set snow dust sifting from some bolt head up in the superstructure. A hiss of powder slid off something outside. I felt the change as much as heard it. The 3 returns tightened their triangle. The wind outside stopped. Completely. The aurora lay down flat, like silk pressed under glass. "Middleton, hold you overhead," came the radio then, but not in any voice that made sense. Tinny, clipped, like someone talking across a long room made of paper. A man who learned his radio when they popped and crackled. "Report Angels 3. The hairs on my neck started a slow burn of disbelief. Angels is altitude in thousands. Nobody says that anymore. Not here. I grabbed the old generator headlamp, the heavy yellow one that always smells like warm plastic, and shouldered through the door. It felt like pushing syrup. The night hit me in the face. Black air, white ice limned green. I looked up and a shadow slid across the stars. Not a shape. A subtraction. Pressure changed in my teeth. A cabinet climb ache that made my ears want to pop. My fingers prickled as if I'd dipped them in snow too long. "If you can hear me, we see you," I said, because what else do you say to a subtraction in the sky? The radio answered in my voice, perfectly timed, perfectly mine. "If you can hear me, we see you." Then there was a third voice, the old, clipped one. "Acknowledge, Middleton. We are low on fuel. My mouth went dry so fast my tongue stuck to the roof of it. The scope in the shack flickered. A hiccup in the phosphor pattern. One by one, the returns winked out like eyes closing. North gone, south gone, the overhead last, a slow fade as if something massive was climbing slow into a sky already full. The wind came back all at once and punched the door into my shoulder, blew a handful of ice crystals into my face like sand. The aurora snapped, brightened, started its rustle. Overhead, the radome sang a brief, pure ring, like someone had struck glass and leaned in to listen for the last echo. The building exhaled and settled. My headlamp flickered against the cold and steadied. I stood there with my breath going white and straight up, staring into a patch of sky that did not want to give anything back. The only sounds were the generator's constant, the distant slap of water against rock, and the little ticking noises electronics make when they decide to be normal again. The Coast Guard logged my call as auroral interference. They were polite about it. The log line was crisp. The data recorder on the scope showed nothing. A flat line where my eyes swore 3 spikes had been. My own voice on the tape didn't play back at all. The Angel's 3 voice did, but it sounded oddly compressed, like someone had pushed the world into low bit rate, intelligible, barely, and only if you already knew what he was saying. I went digging in older logs a week later because that's what you do when the island eats sleep and gives you too much time. I found a typed entry from 1962, onion skin paper scanned into a modern folder, about a flight lost over water near Middleton. The last line read, "Fuel low. Holding overhead, Angels 3. No ditching position found. No wreckage. Just weather, salt, and silence carrying names away from desks." Every tech has a weird log story. Equipment does things we don't have names for. Seawater, cold, and aurora make for lively lies. You learn which glitches to document and which to chalk up to the island's personality. But you do this long enough and you start keeping some things in the space between your teeth and your tongue. I don't key the VHF at night unless I have to. I don't stand under the radome if the wind dies to nothing all at once. And I do not, under any circumstances, answer a voice that sounds exactly like mine when my mouth is closed. You'll get told it's all interference, that aurora turns the sky into a radio and every signal gets bent, your own included. You'll hear that old logs read like ghost stories because people didn't have good equipment, and that modern gear doesn't lose planes, it just loses data. Maybe. I can live with maybe. What I can't quite fold into neat rational corners is the feeling of pressure changing above me when the wind had died. The way the returns moved like decisions. The polite, clipped cadence of a pilot from another era telling me he was low on fuel above an island that isn't supposed to hold anything up. Sometimes the antenna sings just right, and I'll feel that same little rise of the tiny hairs along my wrists. The radome hums. The aurora sheets and breathes. The recorder blinks, steady and boring. Those nights I make my rounds slower and I speak less. A lonely island will teach you to leave the airwaves alone and let the sky keep its secrets. If you ever find yourself out there, in a room with a scope that shows dots no one else sees, with wind that turns off like a switch, with a radio that returns your own words a half-second late, remember this. Echoes are patient. They will try to make you talk. Don't. That's how you end up having conversations with a past that still thinks it's overhead, burning its last fuel, waiting for someone to acknowledge a call that never reached shore. Corrections work is routine until it isn't. I've been a CO at Spring Creek, down in Seward long enough to know which doors stick, which cameras lie, and which inmates are going to make your night harder just by the way they breathe at count. I did years in Seg, the hole, the issue, where the quiet is supposed to be total. But in the quiet, you start to hear what the building hears. The night event breathed back at me. I put in a transfer to the day side. A storm off Resurrection Bay had shouldered all day at the walls. By midnight, the barometer press made everyone's skulls ache. In Seg, we had 3 men and a woman on watch. One of the inmates, Calloway in cell 3, had been banging his cup at lights out. "Something's in my vent," he yelled. He yelled this every 3rd night, and routine teaches you which alarms are wolves and which are boys who cry. I told him to settle, in that tone that says I'll be back to check, but not right now. At 1 a.m., count cleared. Lights went low. The cameras stitched together the run the way they always do, a top-down angle that makes men look like chess pieces, a fisheye in each cell, grainy and over-sharpened at low lux. I did a walk. My boots put a hollow drumline down the concrete. The cinder block absorbed sound and returned it thinner, like a room practicing how to breathe. At cell 3, Calloway was up in the corner on his bunk, eyes not on me, but on the vent. He didn't turn when I stopped at his door. His breath fogged the glass, strange in a heated block. He said, conversational as if we were discussing chow, "Listen," like he was introducing me to a song he loved. I leaned on the door window. The cell vent is a narrow slit near the ceiling, steel baffles set deep to keep hands from reaching. At first I heard nothing but the building, the dull roar of the air handler, the comforting tick of heat in the walls. Then I heard it, a whispery inhalation and a matching exhale, but wrong in rhythm. The intake pulled not at the half-second rest of the mechanical system, but at 6 slow counts, then out, then in again, then a pause. Listening. "Pipe issue," I said to the empty hallway, because it's easier to say a thing out loud if you can pretend you're saying it to someone. "I'll call it in." I did not call it in. Maintenance isn't showing up at Aura 100 to pop a vent in Seg. Calloway kept his eyes on that slit and whispered to it, soft and sweet the way people talk to babies or dogs. "This one hears you," he told the vent. "This one's nice." Back at the desk, I watched the monitors. The lens on cell 3 bloomed a halo, like someone had shined a flashlight into it from inside. The feed stopped scrolling smooth and started stepping. 1 frame per second, a metronome instead of a movie. In each frozen image, Calloway was a little closer to the vent. His feet didn't move. No weight shift, no blur. Between frames, he slid across his bunk the way a bishop moves diagonally. There, then there, like the room had decided to help him along. The control room door made its little hydraulic sigh. Every door in this block does that. An annoyed exhale on open, a wheeze on close. I turned, expecting a supervisor or a nurse on a check. No one stood there. Empty hallway, red exit sign breathing its dull pulse. When I turned back, the monitors went to black for the length of a held breath. A long blink. Then the feeds came back. The vent grill in 3 looked different, darker somehow, as if someone had pressed a piece of mat board up to the inside of it and held it there with the heel of a hand. The overhead fluorescence cracked and then went dark, not all at once but in a rip that ran the length of the block. Emergency lights bled red into the corridors a heartbeat later. The temperature dropped so fast the hair on my forearms prickled under the uniform like it wanted to stand up and run. I ran for the Seg door. My badge beeped green. The mag lock didn't release. I hit the manual override. Frozen. I mashed the intercom, felt that instant elastic given the button. Open Seg, I said, and the box cut my own voice to ribbons. Open Seg became open, high, and small. A child trying on the shape of the word. Then laughter. The slow crinkle of a plastic water bottle squeezed and released. Right against my ear and nowhere near it. Above me. Inside the ductwork, not in the cell, not across the hall, something scraped. Nails? Fingers? Metal on metal. Fast and light like something testing where the bolts sit. I found the crash bar by training alone and hammered it with the heel of my hand. It gave. I shoved through and bolted the run, keys on my hip singing their little chime. Cell 3's window had fogged thick from the inside. A handprint bloomed on the glass, palm centered, fingers splayed. Not Calloway's, the hand was too small, the fingers narrow. Another print appeared on the other side of the pane, long-fingered, printed in reverse as if the hand were inside the glass, not behind it. The fog wiped itself from the inside in a single diagonal streak, revealing Calloway's face flattened to the window. Eyes too wide, mouth open but giving no sound at all. Like he'd emptied his voice into the air and the air had kept it. The vent above his bed breathed in. You could see it work on the glass, fog bleeding toward the slit in a visible stream of damp. A shadow slid across the vent opening, slow and deliberate, a bulge forming like a plastic bag filling, pressing the baffles until they made a sound I can only describe as a laugh. The emergency lights flickered and came back dimmer, smearing the edges of everything until corners looked like curves. I fumbled at my belt like an idiot. Keys. Keys. Despite the fact you can't key a seg door from the wrong side. Panic will make you try anyway. The interlock panel's red light flashed in frantic time and then froze, solid crimson. I put my hand flat to the glass to show him I was there, that I wasn't going to leave him with that thing breathing at him. For a second, something on the other side put something flat against mine. It did not feel like a hand. It felt colder than the inside of a freezer, a frost with pressure behind it. I yanked back on reflex. The pads of my fingers smarted as if I'd touched dry ice. The vent inhaled again, longer this time. Calloway's lips shaped a word I could read even if I couldn't hear it. Help. He began to slide off the bed toward the floor as if the space above him had become heavier than the bed could hold. The shadow in the duct bulged, retreated, bulged, as if tasting the shape of the room, measuring it. The laugh in the baffles noise ticked down the length of the run behind me, like a joke shared cell to cell. Every part of me wanted to smash the glass and drag him through a hole that didn't exist. Every part of my training told me to stop wanting anything and go get the door open. The block, for one breath, held perfectly still. No fans, no hum, no wind bucking the outside doors, just the building listening to itself breathe. The overhead lights surged back to full. The red glow died. Somewhere, the mag relay thunked with a clean, blessed click. I slammed the slider on 3, through my shoulder, and got the gap I needed to snake an arm through and slap the panic release on the bed restraint. The strap buckle sprang. Calloway pitched, boneless, off the mattress and hit the concrete on all fours. Instinct took over where voice had failed. He crab-scrambled away from the vent, shirt riding up, eyes fixed on that slit like it could still reach him from across the room. Above, the shadow in the duct pulled back like breath through paper. The baffles gave one last tiny tremor, as if something had peeled its face off the other side of the metal. Then I heard it move, pattering along the inside of the ductwork above me, fast, fingers on sheet metal, seeking screws and seams, heading up and away, down the line of cells. I couldn't track it with my eyes. I could only follow the sound, a skitter that faded toward the far end of the run and left the block empty feeling in its wake. Maintenance came at a civilized hour. They pulled the vent grill with the easy contempt day people keep for night problems. Nothing inside, they said. No evidence of backflow. No unusual condensation. Cold air rushing when the block doors open and close in rapid succession can cause odd noises, pressure shifts, yada, yada. The camera guy said the lens in 3 had oversaturated because of auroral interference. It happens. The light up here makes electronics greedy and blind. Everyone had an answer that made the world neat. Calloway stopped yelling about the thing in his vent after that night. He slept with his shack blanket pulled up over his face like a kid under a fort, and I let him. I transferred to a block with windows. I told myself I prefer the sunshine, not the noise. We don't say we're spooked. We talk about staffing and policy and lock checks and how the coffee tastes like pennies at 3 in the morning when the storm gets into the vents and plays the building like a flute. But ask anyone who's worked nights in a prison long enough. They'll tell you in quiet voices. The building breathes back. It's not just the hum of the fans or the law of equal and opposite pressure. It's the way the air pauses at the wrong time, pulls at the wrong rhythm, like something on the other end is deciding whether to inhale. If you hear it take a breath at 6 slow counts and wait, not the half-second automatisms you know, don't speak to it. Don't reassure it. Don't prove you're listening. If it answers, don't put your hand to the glass to be kind. I still feel that patch of skin smart sometimes when I pass a freezer aisle or hear a bottle crinkle in a quiet room. There's comfort in explanations and work orders and neat logs. There's survival in the rules we keep, the ones we write down, and the ones everyone knows but no one admits. Here's mine. Buildings remember what they hold, the same way men do. On certain nights, they breathe like we do. When the block inhales wrong, you keep your voice and your hands to yourself. You wait it out with your eyes on the door light. And if something in the ductwork decides to go testing the seams above your head, You let it pass. You let it go, looking for screws somewhere else. I worked the night ramp at Bethel, fueling everything from beat-up Cessnas to medical flights. Winter on the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta is a long blue hour with winds you didn't know existed until they found you. The runway lights stretch out like a line of prayer beads into nothing. Pilots use RCAL, 5 quick taps on their mic, and the world appears out of the dark. There's a rule we keep that isn't written on any checklist. If the lights come up and no pilots on the radio, you don't go out and wave. You close the door, keep your head low, and wait. The night after a blizzard clobbered us, when the plows had finally carved the field back into something, like order, and the snowbanks sat heavy and blue under the edge lights. There were no scheduled flights. Even the med runs had pushed to daylight. I was half asleep in the ops office with a cup of coffee going metallic in my hand when the runway lights snapped to life. Medium intensity. 1 second, the glass showed me my own tired reflection. The next, it showed the runway burning in dots of white out into the cold. Across the field, the blue taxiway lights woke up in perfect sequence, one by one bending into a slow arc like they were being counted by an invisible hand. I keyed the radio. Bethel traffic, say position. The tower was cold after hours. The frequency felt big and empty. Silence. Somewhere far off, dogs barked the way they do when the cold carries sound too clearly. The only reply in the room was the hum of the soda machine and the whisper of heat through the vents. Then, through the wall, not the radio, I heard a radial engine, that old 9-cylinder droning sound that works its way into your bones, the kind that warms you because it sounds like summer even when it's -20 and the stars look like pinholes punched through tin. A sound that doesn't belong to turbines or to this decade. I stepped outside because that's what you do. You go see if trouble is trying to reach the runway. The cold slapped hard and clean. My breath went white and straight up. The wind was so still the smell of avgas hung like a poured thing. The night was clear in that hard way. Stars knife-bright overhead, the aurora down on the horizon like green fire kept low and polite by the cold. I didn't see a plane. I heard one. I heard power pulled back, the note of the engine descending like a sigh. A white landing light burned down the approach like a star dipped lower. I stared until my eyes went watery, the way you look at those magic eye posters waiting for the hidden shape. The shape of a plane swam out of the air. A beaver de Havilland. On skis or maybe on wheels, I couldn't hold the detail. Every time I blinked, the letters on the fuselage rearranged themselves, as if my eyes refused to keep the registration number, like it didn't want to be kept. I keyed the radio again, falling into the pattern that keeps us from making mistakes. Traffic landing Bethel, wind calm, altimeter 3001. The radio hissed. My own voice came back to me like it had been run through a tin can 20 feet away. Flat, slightly delayed, familiar in a way I had never liked. Then another voice, scratchy and old-timey, the kind of tone you hear in recordings from an aviation museum, cut in as neat as you please. Bethel, Beaver 49er on final. The way he said it sat me up straight. It had the rhythm my granddad used when he talked about flying on snow and the taste of cold coffee, about bringing mail into villages where the runway was a river and the weather decided who came and went. The landing light held steady, coming on, coming down, like a decision made somewhere I couldn't reach. The landing light was suddenly on top of me, a glare I had to shade my eyes from with the back of my glove. The pressure wave off a low pass hit first, a push against my chest that made the fabric of my parka jump and settle, and then the prop wash came like a fist, hard, rolling. It grabbed at the loose edges of me and shook. Snow devils spun up off the taxiway, white snakes whipping around my knees and racing each other in short, angry spirals. The sliding hangar door rattled as if someone had slapped it full hand. The thing is, there was nothing in front of me. My eyes, stubborn, rational, insisted there was nothing. My skin, older, less proud, insisted there was something large and spinning inches away. I stumbled back a step, boots squeaking on the packed powder, and something brushed my shoulder as it went by. Not fabric, not bone. The cold that comes off a spinning blade, A winter wind organized and purposeful. The smell of exhaust rolled over my tongue. That particular sweetness from an engine working in the cold. I gagged on it, tears stinging quick and hot. My fingertips burned where the cold found the small gap between glove and sleeve. A raw sting that made me curl my fingers on reflex. The plane I couldn't see passed the point I was standing and kept moving like it had always been moving, like it had forgotten to be seen. On the thin layer of powder on the taxiway, ski tracks etched themselves. Long, shallow grooves appeared as if drawn by a stylus. They were clean, even. The kind of marks you get when a load is right and a pilot knows the weight of his own machine. I followed them with my eyes, counting my breaths, half waiting for the joke, the cut in the snow where the trick revealed itself. The grooves ran 100 feet and then stopped. Not like brakes, not like a turn. They ended in a wide curve that faded into unmarked snow, a suggestion where a taxi should have been, like the record of movement had tired out. "Bethel traffic, radio check," said the radio, my voice this time, clear as if I were still inside. I looked down at the handheld in my glove, accusing, because my mouth had been shut. A beat later, like a record not quite spinning at the right speed. "Radio check," the old voice off by a hair like time between us wasn't quite lined up. "Good check," I said. The words left my mouth before the smarter part of my brain caught up. My breath hung in a white cloud that drifted and broke apart like it had somewhere else to be. "Coffee's hot," I added, a reflex born of listening to my granddad. He always said that to anyone who'd been cold a little too long, like a password among people who had chosen this work. It felt stupid and right in the same breath. Down at the far end of the runway, one of the white lights blinked exactly once. Not a flicker, a blink. Like a wink somebody hadn't planned to give. The runway lay there like it always does, straight, honest, indifferent. The blue taxiway lights stood at attention, frost sparkling around each bulb. The aurora tried a brighter sweep and failed to make any of it make sense. I stood with the radio in my hand and the smell of exhaust in my throat, and watched empty air settle as if it had just been disturbed by something that had weight and memory, and a place to be. In the daylight, the world always looks like it meant to be ordinary. The next day, when the ramp warmed up into its version of alive, people moving, radios busy, the snowbanks softened into rounded shapes, I pulled what I could. Records, old dispatches. You can find ghosts if you want to. A beaver lost in '73 came up more than once. Radio out, frost, wing icing. The kind of words that go flat on paper until you remember what they look like in a pilot's hands. Beaver 4-9er was there in a yellow dispatch ticket like a memory worn thin at the corners by being handled too much. My granddad had flown here once, back when the lines on maps meant other things. He came home with frostbitten ears and a new respect for rivers that pretend to be runways. He kept a spiral notebook of tail numbers like it was a church registry. One page had a B scratched through and the words, "Almost made it." He wrote small. He didn't talk about it much. I started leaving a thermos at the threshold of the hangar, tucked just under the lip where the wind can't bully it. Coffee strong enough to float a spoon. I put a rock on it so the gusts can't roll it clean into the tie-downs. When it freezes solid after a month, I take it home, thaw it with patience, and bring it back full. It's not a ritual I'd try to explain in the daylight, but on certain nights it feels like an answer to a question nobody asked. I've heard that. Engine a handful of times since, the agreeable sewing machine drone that doesn't belong to turbines or to the schedules stuck on the office wall. The lights come up when no one clicks them. The radio says my words when my mouth is closed, just enough to make me look at it and then look at the sky. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make a day person nod and write it up with interest. Just this, a feeling of traffic in a place where there shouldn't be any, and the white lights shining out there like eyes that already know the ending. If you work nights at Bethel, you learn to keep your head on a swivel for reasons the manual covers and reasons it doesn't. If the runway lights glow like eyes and you can't pin who turned them on, you keep your voice low and your hands steady. If the wind hits you like something big just missed you by inches, it probably did. Offer coffee. Some pilots are just trying to get home. I don't go looking for the tracks anymore. I don't need proof in the snow to believe my own skin. I keep the radios clean and the tanks topped and the apron clear because that's the job. The rest of it, the blink at the end light, the old clipped radio check, the white grooves that run 100 feet and then decide to be nothing, is between. The field and whatever still flies the pattern when the dogs bark and the sky is green at the edges. I can